Kix and I, notoriously broke up. I got the warehouse, he got the merchandise semi and the hot air.
At 71 years old, after a lifetime of roaring crowds, broken stages, and the songs that carved themselves into the soul of America, Ronnie Dunn finally reached the moment he could no longer outrun. Under the blinding lights of Indianapolis, he stepped to the edge of the stage, not like a legend greeting his kingdom, but like a man standing at the end of a storm. His hand rose to his chest, not dramatic, not triumphant, just quiet, soft, final, and then the impossible. He walked off. The arena froze. 20,000 voices collapsed into stunned silence. No warning, no explanation. Behind him, Kix Brooks kept playing, unaware that the moment would detonate across the internet before sunrise. Fans thought he fainted. Others thought it was a heart attack, and some whispered that this was the night Ronnie finally broke. But the truth, the real truth, began long before that wave, that silence, that walk into the dark. It began decades earlier in the shadows of a life torn between the pulpit he was expected to serve and the music that refused to let him go. And what happened next would shake the very foundation of everything Brooks and Dunn ever built. It began like any other Brooks and Dunn show, loud, electric, and overflowing with the kind of nostalgia only a duo like them could summon. 20,000 fans packed the Gainbridge Fieldhouse, shouting every word to Boot Scoot and Boogie like it was still 1992. Kix Brooks was on fire, feeding off the energy as effortlessly as breathing. And Ronnie, he stood front and center, the anchor, the steady heartbeat of the night, until something changed. At first, it was nothing, just a subtle shift in posture, a split-second hesitation in a man known for never missing a beat. But then his movement slowed, his shoulders tightened, his face, usually carved from calm steel, pulled tight with something heavier than exhaustion. The band saw it instantly. A tiny shake of Ronnie's head. No words, just a look. The kind of look only understood by people who have spent thousands of nights on stage together, surviving chaos, triumph, and heartbreak as one machine. Somewhere in the sea of fans, radio host Matt Malone had his phone pointed right at the stage. His camera captured everything: the tremble in Ronnie's hand, the hesitation in his step, the quiet surrender in his eyes. Then Ronnie stepped forward, not toward the music, not toward the spotlight, but toward the edge of the stage, toward truth. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes heavy with something too deep for words, placed his hand gently over his heart, and walked away. The crowd gasped, the band froze, the air cracked with shock. Kix Brooks kept the show moving, because what else could he do? But the tension was unmistakable. Backstage, chaos erupted. No answers, no explanations, just stunned silence and confusion swirling in every corner of the arena. By morning, the clip had swept across social media like a wildfire. A fan's simple caption, "Feel better, Ronnie," ignited a storm of speculation. But none of the viewers, commenters, or reporters had any idea what had been quietly unraveling inside Ronnie Dunn long before he ever stepped onto that stage in Indianapolis. The official statement came days later. Short, flat, emotionless. Ronnie wasn't feeling well. That was it. No details, no explanation. Nothing to satisfy a fan base that had watched their hero stumble off a stage without a word. It was the kind of a statement meant to calm the storm, but instead, it only made the storm angrier, because people didn't believe it, not for a second. Not when the man who had pushed through decades of relentless touring, late-night shows, back-to-back performances, and the silent toll of fame suddenly stepped away in the middle of a song, not when his departure looked less like fatigue and more like collapse. Then in Rosemont, Illinois, just days later, Ronnie returned to a stage as if nothing had ever happened. The voice? Perfect. The fire? Alive. The crowd? Roaring again. Everything looked normal. Too normal. And that was the part that haunted fans the most. How could someone fall apart one night and be flawless the next? How could a man break in Indianapolis, then rise untouched in Rosemont? Theories exploded everywhere. Some whispered about a hidden medical issue. Some blamed stress. Others pointed to something darker, something heavy that had been building for years. And though the band said nothing, refusing interviews, dodging speculation, their faces in those rare backstage glimpses told enough. Something had shifted, something deep. To longtime fans, the incident wasn't just strange. It was personal, because Ronnie Dunn wasn't just a singer. He was the voice that carried them through heartbreaks, highways, first loves, lost loves, and every dusty, hard-earned chapter in between. Watching him falter felt like watching a family member break. But what happened that night was only the surface, a crack in a foundation that had been weakening for years. Because Ronnie's collapse didn't begin with exhaustion. It began decades earlier, back when he was forced to choose between two worlds that could never coexist, preacher or performer. Long before the lights, the sold-out arenas, and the roar of country music fame, Ronnie Dunn was supposed to live a completely different life, one without stages, without crowds, without the chaos of the road. He was supposed to become a preacher. Born in 1953 in the dusty, tight-knit town of Coleman, Texas, Ronnie grew up surrounded by the rhythm of church bells, scripture, and Sunday sermons. His family envisioned him standing behind a pulpit, guiding congregations with faith and certainty. And for a while, young Ronnie believed it too. At Hardin-Simmons University, he studied theology with relentless focus, filling notebooks with sermon outlines, Bible references, and reflections on faith. On the surface, he was following the path his family had laid out for him. But beneath that quiet exterior, something else was growing, something louder, a fire that didn't belong in a chapel. Because while his classmates prayed and prepared for ministry, Ronnie was alone in his dorm room, not with a scripture, but with a bass guitar. While others whispered prayers, he whispered melodies. While others practiced sermons, he practiced chords. What began as a small rebellion quickly twisted into something undeniable. Music wasn't just a distraction, it was a calling, more powerful than sermons, more honest than scripture, more him. His secret life didn't stay secret for long. The university found out. And just like that, Ronnie was given an ultimatum: stay and preach, or leave and sing. A choice that would define the rest of his life. Ronnie chose the music, and with that choice, everything familiar collapsed. He was expelled. His family was devastated. His future, once clear and predictable, was suddenly shattered. But Ronnie never looked back. Meanwhile, 400 miles away in Louisiana, a boy named Leon Eric Kix Brooks was growing up in a completely different kind of church, one filled not with sermons, but with records, guitars, and the legends of country music. Johnny Horton lived just down the street. Nashville wasn't a dream, it was the destination. Two boys, two worlds, two destinies set in motion long before they ever met, one chasing rebellion, one chasing rhythm. And those two paths were quietly, slowly, inevitably moving toward a collision that would change country music forever. Their paths couldn't have been more different, yet fate, or perhaps just a producer with a wild sense of intuition, pulled them toward the same crossroads. By 1989, Ronnie Dunn's career was barely clinging to life. The Nashville dream he'd chosen over his family's expectations felt like a door that kept slamming shut. But then, in a twist that sounded like fiction, a friend secretly entered Ronnie into a Marlboro-sponsored talent contest. Ronnie didn't even know he was competing until he won. That victory led to a recording session in Nashville, and the demo from that session landed in the hands of producer Scott Hendricks. Hendricks passed it to Arista executive Tim DuBois, a man with an ear sharp enough to hear gold in a faint gravel tone. DuBois listened and recognized something rare in Ronnie's voice. But Ronnie alone wasn't the full picture. There was intensity, soul, depth, but Tim heard something missing. Balance. He wanted a counterweight, someone who could match Ronnie's fire with flair, someone polished, charismatic, already trusted by the industry. That someone was Kix Brooks. Kix wasn't struggling. He'd already written hits for John Conley and the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. He was respected, quick-witted, and magnetic on the stage. If Ronnie was a storm rolling in from the horizon, Kix was the lightning that cracked across the sky. Putting them together wasn't destiny, it was a gamble. Their first meeting wasn't magic, it was awkward. Two men sizing each other up, unsure whether this partnership was genius or a disaster waiting to happen. But then they sat down to write. And suddenly, the room changed, the words flowed. The melodies clicked. Ronnie's slow-burning soul fused with Kix's sharp-edged energy. It wasn't perfect, but it was electric, the kind of electricity that doesn't happen twice. That demo landed them a record deal almost overnight, and by the summer of 1991, their debut single Brand New Man wasn't just climbing the charts, it was exploding across the country. Then came an avalanche of hits: My Next Broken Heart, Neon Moon, Boot Scoot, and Boogie, all number ones. 4 straight chart toppers, something no country duo had ever accomplished. They didn't simply arrive, they detonated. But even as the music soared, the crowds grew and the awards poured in. Something beneath the surface wasn't connecting. The foundation was shaking. Because even though the chemistry between them on the stage was undeniable, their connection off stage was still that of strangers. And in a partnership built on pressure, fame, and expectation, that distance can become a crack big enough to break anything. By the end of their explosive debut, Brooks and Dunn weren't just successful, they were untouchable. Their first album went 6 times platinum, and their follow-up, Hard Workin' Man, wasn't far behind. Hit after hit, award after award. They didn't simply dominate the charts, they redefined country music. They shattered records. They collected Grammys, CMA awards, and an almost unbroken streak of Vocal Duo of the Year titles from 1992 to 2006. Their live shows became legendary. Blazing lights, roaring pyrotechnics, and stadiums packed with 50,000 fans singing every word. It was an empire built on pure adrenaline. But behind all the spotlight and noise, the truth was much quieter. They were opposites in every way. Ronnie, the quiet storm, intense, soulful, a man who carried the weight of every lyric like a confession. Kix, the firecracker, energetic, magnetic, the guy bounding across the stage like he owned both the lights and the crowd. Together, they created a balance that felt almost supernatural. The chemistry was real, so real it reshaped an entire genre. But offstage, their relationship told a very different story. There were no late-night heart-to-hearts, no holiday dinners, no brotherly bond behind the curtain. They weren't best friends. They were co-pilots, two men orbiting the same mission: make great music, sell it loud, and keep the machine moving. And for a while, that was enough. But years of touring, endless interviews, sleepless nights, and the constant demand to be perfect began to take their toll. The excitement faded. The rhythm that once felt natural began to feel mechanical. The spark dimmed. They didn't fight, they didn't implode, there was no betrayal, no explosive argument. They simply wore out. And in 2009, after nearly 2 decades ruling the top of the genre, Brooks and Dunn made a decision that stunned the industry. They walked away. But walking away from greatness comes at a cost. And for Ronnie Dunn, that cost would cut deeper than anyone realized. When Brooks and Dunn announced their split in 2009, the world expected drama, fights, betrayal, some explosive moment that shattered the greatest duo in country music. But none of that happened. There was no meltdown, no scandal, just a quiet truth they could no longer ignore. They were burned out. After 20 relentless years at the top, the excitement that once carried them had faded into routine. The machine kept moving, but the soul behind it was gone. And though the decision was mutual, the impact on each man couldn't have been more different. Kix Brooks looked forward, energized by possibility, radio, acting, new creative adventures. But for Ronnie Dunn, the split didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like a free fall. Their farewell tour, titled The Last Rodeo, didn't feel like a celebration of their legacy. For Ronnie, it felt like watching the final pages of a book he wasn't ready to close. Each city brought them closer to the end, and with every song, he felt a little more of himself slipping away. The final show in Nashville in 2010 hit hardest. As the lights dimmed and the noise faded, Ronnie stood there, silhouetted in the dark, asking a question he'd never asked before. Who am I without Brooks and Dunn? Without the harmonies? Without the crowds? Without him? When he tried to answer that question with a solo album in 2011, the truth cut deeper than he expected. The songs were strong, his voice was unmistakable. But country radio had moved on. DJs barely played the record. The silence was deafening. And for the first time in decades, Ronnie felt truly, painfully irrelevant. He retreated from the spotlight, from the industry, from people. Recording wasn't joy anymore. It was pressure. It was doubt. It was fear whispering that his time had passed. Out on his Nashville farm, the quiet that had once given him peace now felt like isolation. He paced the fields, wondering whether the voice that once filled arenas still mattered at all. By 2014, he wasn't chasing a comeback. He was simply trying to remember why he sang in the first place. There were no blazing lights now, no roaring crowds, no pyro, no tour buses, no interviews, just a quiet Tennessee farm and a man with a guitar trying to remember who he was. After the industry turned silent, Ronnie Dunn did something he hadn't done in years, something he'd forgotten how to do. He wrote for himself. No label deadlines, no pressure for radio hits, no expectations of chart performance, just raw emotion poured into simple melodies. Songs shaped not for a crowd, but for healing. And what came out of him wasn't polished or commercial. It was rough, honest, unfiltered truth. Songs carved from pain, loss, and the fragile pieces of a man rebuilding himself from the wreckage of fame. Those songs became the album Peace, Love, and Country Music. It didn't top charts, it didn't dominate radio, but it didn't need to, because for the first time in years, Ronnie sounded like Ronnie again. No pressure, no pretenses, just the voice of a man finally breathing freely. Then Ronnie made a decision that changed everything. He started his own record label. No middlemen, no executives, no long boardroom tables filled with people who didn't understand him. For the first time in his career, he had full control of his music, his creativity, his direction, his future. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a reclamation. And in that process, something beautiful happened. Ronnie began helping younger artists, lifting them up, guiding them away from the traps and heartbreaks he had to spend decades navigating. He became a quiet mentor, a protector, a voice of wisdom for the next generation. While Ronnie rediscovered clarity and peace in solitude, Kix Brooks thrived on a completely different path, hosting American Country Countdown, dipping his toes into acting, staying close to music but far from the grind. Their worlds were separate, their lives had drifted apart. But then, over dinner one night, something unexpected happened. A simple idea was tossed across the table, half joke, half nostalgia. What if we played again? No pressure, no stadium tours, no industry expectations, just music, just two old friends who had once changed country music. They didn't know it yet, but that idea would spark something powerful, something that would lead them back to the stage, back to the fans, back to who they truly were. It started casually. No grand plan, no industry strategy meeting, just two men who had shared decades of music, miles of road, and a lifetime of memories sitting at dinner, talking. And then, almost as a joke, the question slipped out. What if we played again? Not a world tour, not a grueling schedule, just something simple, something fun. And as soon as the words were spoken, something flickered between them. A spark they hadn't felt in years. Not pressure, but possibility. Then came the perfect invitation. Reba McEntire, their longtime friend, offered them a residency at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. No endless travel, no tour buses, one stage, one venue, one chance to do things their way. It was everything Ronnie had needed, everything Kix had been waiting for, and everything their fans never thought they'd see again. And when Brooks and Dunn stepped onto that stage in 2015, under the shimmering lights of Vegas, something miraculous happened. It clicked, not forced, not pressured, not mechanical like the final years before the split. This time, the music felt alive again. Ronnie's voice soared, clear, powerful, unburdened by doubt for the first time in years. Kix moved with the fire and a swagger that had made him a live wire showman. The chemistry wasn't just back, it was sharper than ever. And they weren't chasing hits or awards anymore. They were chasing purpose. Then came the reboot albums. Modern country artists reimagining the classics. Luke Combs ignited Brand New Man with raw energy. Kane Brown brought new power to Believe. Jelly Roll added a haunting gospel sweep. Megan Maroney slowed Ain't Nothing 'Bout You into something delicate and aching. Morgan Wallen approached Neon Moon with reverence, barely touching it, letting the song breathe like a living memory. These weren't remakes, they were reintroductions, bridges connecting generations. And the result? A cross-era revival that proved one truth. Great songs don't fade. They evolve. In 2024, Brooks and Dunn shocked the industry again when they were named CMA Vocal Duo of the Year. decades after their debut, after their breakup, after the silence, they were back. Not for glory, not for charts, but because they had rediscovered who they were. And for Ronnie Dunn, that was more than a comeback. It was redemption. After everything, the meteoric rise, the burnout, the silence, the collapse on stage, the doubts that nearly erased him, Ronnie Dunn didn't just return. He reclaimed himself. He came back on his own terms with a voice reborn, not from pressure or expectation, but from truth. And the world, decades later, was ready to hear him again. Brooks and Dunn weren't chasing trophies anymore. They weren't fighting for relevance. They weren't trying to prove anything to radio critics or even to each other. They were simply being who they always were. Two men who loved the music, two men who needed the music, two men who were always stronger together than apart. And fate, after dragging them through storms, silence, and reinvention, had brought them full circle. In the end, the story wasn't about a collapse. It wasn't about burnout. It wasn't about walking off a stage in Indianapolis. It was about resilience, about a man who lost his voice, lost his fire, lost his direction, and still found his way back. Because real music, real connection, never truly fades. It might go quiet, it might crack, it might collapse under the weight of the world, but it never dies. And Ronnie Dunn, at 71, stood as living proof of that truth. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more Untold legends, and check out the next chapter